We acknowledge the original owners of the land on which we podcast, whose stories were told for thousands of years. Today, we are recording in Meanjin. We pay our respects to elders past and present who may be listening. Sovereignty was never ceded. A quick note before we get started that there may be some swearing in today's podcast. If you don't like swearing or usually listen with children in the car, you have been warned. You're listening to What in the NDIS, the News, a podcast where I, Hannah Redford, and my friend Sam Rosenbaum discuss all the hot topics out of the NDIS. Hey Sam, how are you going?
Yeah, good thanks, Hannah. How about yourself?
I have joined the glasses wearing club. I have to now wear glasses
welcome.
all the time.
Welcome. It's a fantastic club. We have jackets. I'll get them sent out to you.
Thank you. I would love a jacket.
Yeah, although we're sort of going out of jacket weather. It's been quite sunny outside lately. It's been fantastic.
Oh yeah, it's so hot up here in Meanjin at the moment.
Yeah, indeed. I jumped in the pool this morning. It was fabulous. But yeah, we've got great little news updates podcast for everyone today. Got a couple of topics to cover, and the big one is the Disability Royal Commission.
Yeah, I'm really excited to start talking about this. Now, what they handed down was massive and over a number of volumes.
12 volumes to be exact, and then there was 222 recommendations made, as well as being almost 10,000 people have been contributed to the report and through public and private sessions. So that's a great amount of people that have sort of given their voice. Which was a big aspect of and the rest of Australia to listen and what's going to be coming out. So yeah, but the 12 volumes, so something like 4 million odd words and a lot of pages to read. And I will admit I haven't read them all. A lot to chew through, but there is some really interesting things that are coming out of it.
Yeah, so I didn't go and read the full report. I know this.
Well, you'd still probably be reading it. I know, like if you'd started end to end, it would take quite a number of weeks to get through, even with considerable constant reading. So it's a lot to chew through, but that's to be expected for a 4-year run, and the amount of people that have contributed, the amount of stuff that's come out of it already, and also find out how the government responds to and how the rest of Australia responds to it as well will be interesting to see. But I thought I'd give a bit of a rundown on what the 12 volumes are. I'm not going into too much depth because there's a lot there to chew through, but volume 1 starts off with the executive summary, outlining the vision for an inclusive Australia and the recommendations. So it's a bit of a cheat sheet for those that sort of want a one-stop shop, sort of that's your starting point. And then you can go from there. Volume 1 goes into the voices of people with disability, so what we've heard. Volume 2 is about the Royal Commission, so what was set up, the need, what's its founding principles were. 3 was the nature and the extent of violence, abuse, neglect, and exploitation of people with a disability. And we heard some really confronting stories by people and of their lived experience, and unfortunately some highlighting some very big need for change, systemic change, through the way providers and the government interact with people with disabilities and go out and make sure that they're protected and not going through some of the horrendous sort of treatment that they have. Volume 4, realising human rights of people with a disability, and that's got some cool recommendations. So one of the recommendations is that the Australian government establishes a Disability Rights Act, and that is to embed the international human rights set out in the Convention for the Rights of a Person with a Disability into enforceable domestic Australian law. So that's where you hear a lot of we follow or uphold the rights of people with a disability, but there's not, other than the UN Convention. We've got legislation that supports it, but nothing that embeds or enshrines the Charter into our Australian law and makes it enforceable.
Which really we should have, like if we're a signatory to that, then the
100%.
second step you first step is signing, yes, we want to be a party to this. The second step is enshrining that into law, surely. That doesn't make much sense to me, Sam. Explain it to me.
Yeah. Bureaucracy, I think is probably the summary of that one. But the interesting thing is some of the commissioners have sort of indicated that it should just sort of apply to the Australian public service to start off with, or whether or not private sector should be included in at the starting point. So what that actually means, because you've got a puzzled look on your face there, so I'll sort of explain that a little bit more. Part of the some elements are saying that it should just be private sector for 4 or 5 years to see how it implements, and that there is arguments though for it to be extended to the private sector, so NDIS providers, straight off the bat. And since we're meant to be meeting that as a standard to do with the NDIS practice standards anyway, we should just be included.
Right? That seems logical to me.
If we're following what we preach and what we're saying we do, it shouldn't come in as a big shock or a big surprise that this needs to be legally enforced. And if you follow the trail of the NDIS Act has this requirement as it's a practice standard requirement, then it's still technically an element of legislation for registered providers. So it's probably more non-registered providers and other Australian private businesses to look at how they uphold the rights of people with disabilities and how they engage and interact and include people with disabilities in their day-to-day operations. That's how you employ, how you engage with, especially when you look at some of the stuff coming out of airlines recently. Some of their, I can't remember his name, but a big surgeon we've got up here in Queensland, he had an incident where ground staff were maneuvering his wheelchair in a way that wasn't consistent with the needs or listening to him or his supports on how to best maneuver it. And he ended up with having an incident there. So there's clearly lots of work that the general Australian public needs to do to include and support people with disabilities and listen to them a lot more than what we're currently at. And that will be the big step that all of this needs to happen, because it's one thing for government to try and put these practices in place, but if the rest of Australia is not following suit or listening to these recommendations, then unfortunately it won't succeed 100% or in the way that we really need it to. But yeah, so I'm an advocate for it to be included in private sector, because it's a bit of a no-brainer there. But we'll see what happens. Volume 5 is governing for inclusion. So that's how the government needs to respond more appropriately and put public policy in place, and the long-term sort of overarching guidance that they can give the wider Australia public and private sector on how we can improve as a whole. Enabling autonomy and access is volume 6. Volume 7 is inclusive education, employment and housing. So this is a big one for me. Education is a changing scope. There's conversations and arguments around the long-term need for special schools and whether or not they should be continued, whether they should be rolled out. I see pros and cons on each side of that argument, and it still both scares me because sometimes I see private special schools don't fulfill the need either, unfortunately, in some very extreme cases. But if the special schools aren't meeting the end-to-end need, then there's lots of progression that we need to make in that area, one way or another. And inclusivity is a big thing for me. So it'd be interesting to see how they respond with that. Employment is another one, big one, and housing options.
I think at the moment, education in Australia is failing people with kids with disabilities. And whether they're at special schools or in the mainstream, it doesn't seem to matter. They're being failed. And, I see that even with my kids, they are definitely being failed by the education system. But I don't see that getting rid of special schools as necessarily a good thing, because one of the things that, I see a special school providing is a place for the people at the really high needs section where, your mainstream school just is just never going to be out. Like, no matter what we do to mainstream schools, there's just no way to include, I don't think there's a way to include the really high needs kids, because there's just so many things that they need that is beyond like the average teacher. The average teacher does need better education for starters at university. I wholeheartedly think that. I think they've got enough to do during a school day without adding to that. So they'd really have to give a really good explanation of how you would have those really high needs kids included in mainstream school for me to be able to understand how that would work. Because the other way that it sometimes has gone is you've had on the other side of the school, far away from any other buildings, is the special education building, and those kids have been excluded anyway within a mainstream school. And then you've got the added issue of bullying, because no one is spending time teaching the rest of the kids what is actually awesome about these kids with disabilities, and then the bullying is what gets them in a mainstream school. So yeah, I'm really interested to see what people say and some of the ideas people come up with, because absolutely, like you know, I'm not totally and utterly against it. I would just I need a lot of convincing.
Yeah, there needs to be systematic reform across the board within mainstream educational facilities, training, and long-term inclusion and exposure for mainstream kids around people with a disability, and having that sort of immediate early exposure to disabilities. Because it's not in grade 1, 2, 3, it's not high prevalence that you see disabilities in a classroom. So it needs to be how we engage children on a general level to engage with people with disabilities needs to change, because I also see a lot of adults still not able to do that well currently.
Yeah, absolutely. What's next?
Yeah, so then, it was employment and housing were also another part of that inclusive element. Employment is another one. I've recently had the opportunity of employing a person with a disability in my business, which is fantastic. And he brings a great amount of knowledge and depth and insight to the team. He's also studying his master's in law and business accounting. So he's a great fit in the business and helping out a great deal, which is awesome. Volume 8, criminal justice and people with a disability, another big one, and one of our favorites, Tradie.
Yes.
He's very passionate about this as well, and it's great to see that we're working towards it, because there's been a lot in the media very recently about how our prison and justice system are failing people with disabilities at astronomical levels. It's gut-wrenching. There's deaths of people with a disability in these systems, and it's horrible, and the system needs to change to better support it. I haven't gotten into this one yet, but yeah.
One of the difficulties I've identified previously when it comes to the prison system is that, or the justice system, is that they don't identify early enough that someone has a disability. And this particularly I find happens when, say, they don't have any family and they might have a provider involved, but, you know, sometimes if you are arrested and taken by the police and then whatever, the provider suddenly doesn't know where you are and where you've gone, and there's no way of finding you. And it could be a few weeks before they finally figure out what's happened. And then you've been in this general population part of the system, and there's been no support because no one as part of that system has identified that there's a disability here, because there was no one to stop everything and say, hang on a second, did you know that this person has a disability? And it would work much better if you could much faster identify someone with a disability. And then there are some systems in there set up to support people. I mean, obviously not enough, not saying there is, but currently there are some things set up to support people with disabilities when they come into contact with the justice system, but they often don't get offered those things because no one identifies the disability is there. So to me, that's the number one spot to start. But anyway, I'm interested to
and it'll
hear
be interesting,
more about it.
Yeah, and to see what the impact, if the government establishes that Disability Rights Act, how the justice system will implement that will be a very big area of interest for me, I think. Volume 9 is First Nations people with a disability. And we know that we've got a long way to go there.
Talking about that, I have been listening to the First People's Disability Network podcast, and I think you all should look it up because it is fantastic, and it's been really, really interesting to listen to it. And what they've been doing is talking to people with disabilities and providers who are Indigenous, and talking about not just being Indigenous, which is often discriminated against, but also with a disability that is often discriminated against. So there's this double issue that they've got of being a minority of a minority, and it's just really interesting, and I think everyone should go listen to that as well as us, of course.
Yeah, let's shove a link up in the description so we can just sort of get straight through there. That sounds like a great idea. So then volume 10, disability services. So that's a big one for the NDIS sector. We won't touch too much into that today because that's going to be a bigger one, bigger episode in a couple of weeks. And then volume 11 and 12. So then we've got the independent oversight and complaints mechanism. So that's speaking about a new commission that they're proposing. And a few other things going on there. And then volume 12 beyond the Royal Commission. So what our next steps are in terms of progressing disability rights and inclusive within Australia. A couple of key implementation points. So the government's setting up a Disability Royal Commission task force. That's going to work across multi-departments and agencies to coordinate the government's response. So as you can imagine, it is a very big piece of work to go through the review, look at how recommendations are going. So I wouldn't expect to see any big sort of movement too soon, but we'll start hearing smaller things that they're going to implement trickling out over the coming months, and then probably some bigger pieces of work and acceptance of recommendations early next year. So the task force will include staff who are seconded from key portfolios. So we've got health, education, Attorney General's department, and the national NDIS team, as well as commission, who report through to ministers and update to the public early next year as expected, and the stages to respond to the recommendation sort of map and how they're going to roll that out, with a total of 4.25 million over the next 2 years to undertake the important work that they're going to be doing.
Cool.
So that's pretty much the summary on the Disability Royal Commission. There's still a lot more that we're sort of got to probably progress, a lot more that we on our podcast that we'll probably be talking about as well. But the next sort of big piece is the PACE updates that we've got going on.
Yes. So PACE is still currently scheduled to start rolling out nationally on the 30th of October. So if you have a plan that starts after the 30th of October, it will be put on to PACE. Currently...
So that's including reviews scheduled after that point too.
Yeah. Currently, they've decided to increase the time of the rollout from 18 months to, well, they're saying 3 years, but I cross my fingers it won't take quite that long, because 3 years seems a really long time to deal with two different systems. However, there is a new website that the NDIS have put together that is purely about PACE and how it will affect different, whether you're a participant or a provider. So I think that's interesting and was needed. So that website
is improvements.ndis.gov.au.
Awesome. And that will also there will be a link in the episode description for you all. So have a look around that. It also has all of the webinar dates that you can sign up to make sure you're across it as well. So Sam, there's more things coming out.
There
the
are.
NDIS
We've got the
review is due.
Yes, and it will be released later on the end of this month. And as normal, we'll take some time to sort of process it, and then we'll bring you the latest out as summaries on that.
So Sam, when is the NDIS review due out?
It'll be due. It's due out this month, so we're most likely expecting the end of the month. Sorry, not the end of the year. But yeah, there hasn't been really any early signs that there's going to be a delay in that, but we should probably note that with the Royal Commission coming out, the NDIS review out, and other changes happening within the sector, that we're going to probably be seeing slow increment planning on how all of this sort of gets actualized over the next 3-5 years. So, which is a very exciting time for the industry and for people with a disability, and the wider community.
I'm excited.
There is one thing that we need, indeed. There is one thing that we need to discuss, and that's been brought up by a lovely listener who expressed that they were a bit worried about my absence, not being on some podcasts all the time.
Yeah, it's not because you don't love us or that I don't love you. It's
because I love you. Lots of love. We love all the love.
Yeah.
But yes, no, unfortunately, I'm not always available. Sometimes my consulting schedule conflicts with us wanting to try and get out weekly. But yeah, so that's kind of a bit of why I'm not always on every podcast. But yeah, doesn't mean I don't love anyone else any less. But yeah, so we'll have some new upcoming podcasts. We'll have some sessions on PACE. We'll go through some of the volumes in a little bit more detail. There's a couple of other ideas we're talking about, Hannah.
Yeah, so keep listening.
Yeah, and if you want to come on the podcast, be a guest, or have sort of any topics that you'd like to hit us up to discuss, our email is
whatinthendispod@gmail.com.
So yeah, send us through some emails, reach out, give us some love as well. And yeah, thanks for listening.
Yeah, give us some love. Tell us that we're doing a good job, please.
And hopefully we'll get our Facebook and socials up live very soon. So we'll let you know, and you can follow us there as well. You've been listening to What in the NDIS Now, a podcast brought to you by me, Hannah Redford, and my friend Samuel Rosenbaum. Huzzah!
Thank you for listening. Please share with people you know. Until next time, as the Green Brothers say, don't forget to be awesome.